John Obrien, how you doing today?
Pretty good.
All right, so we're going to be doing a little bit of history of the room and history of the river and the club, but we're going to start out with this poster right here. So why don't you give us a little bit of the background? You said who created the poster? Was it a project originally? Or?
This was done. It was done by a young lady in college, and it was a college project, to the best of my knowledge. And she got with a couple of club members, along with some of the people from Friends of White River. And this was the outcome of what she did. And it's really a pretty good history of the river.
Why don't you point out a few things on it? I know you said your dad was on there as well.
Well, right here it says Lowell Obrien, Musical Instruments, world's only manufacturer of glass clarinet mouthpieces.
Which we've got.
Yeah, that's a blank.
One right here. Mm-hmm. And that's before it got the end.
That's after it comes out of the heat treat.
Right.
And that's one of them that's finished. 27 hand operations.
Is there anything else on the poster you want to mention at this point?
Not at this point. Not at this point. There's stories about all of these things.
Right.
Some of them I know, some of them I don't know. It says here Smith Island, which is where the yacht club is. This property was originally an island, and when the founders of the yacht club bought the property, over time they turned around and filled in the low parts, and we now have what we have going on now.
All right, we're going to go to the other side of the room.
Don't ask me to spell it.
All right, so here's a gantry, and looks like it's for hosting boats.
It's for lifting boats up out of the water, bigger boats.
Right.
We took it down in the 80s because it just wasn't working anymore, and it was an eyesore.
And then nobody got down here.
Mike Boone Mike Boone, his dad, Bob, back when he was a little tiny thing, probably before my time.
You can still see the look on his face, though. He's got the same smirk.
Yeah, there you go.
And here's an aerial shot of just the river itself, basically.
Right, this is Westfield Boulevard.
Yeah, Bank and Ryan and Broadpool.
This is where Broadpool was, and when it was in its heyday and it was an amusement park, my understanding was it was really pretty cool. Downstream from Broadpool Park was Green City Boathouse, which my dad, when he was a kid, used to work there opening up pop bottles, and they would rent canoes. They had like 500 different canoes they would rent, and they would all be out any given night. And he told stories of when he would get off work, because he went to work by boat. He lived on the river. He had a 15 horsepower Neptune on a canvas covered kayak. When he would get off work at 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, he would run upriver wide open, about 15 miles an hour, with 500 canoes out and no lights, and he says, I never hit a canoe.
Jeez.
He was the one that taught me how to read a river to run fast at night.
Wow. And then what about these?
This one is Pim Cornelius. He lived here. He had a house here on the river. It was actually the first boat I ever rode in that I remember, and it was a side steer, which means he's got the steering wheel there.
And then we got some racing going on
Boat
here.
racing on the river. I would almost guess that this would be the South House here at the club, and they were running downriver. And this was Errol Ranking.
So he's a podiatrist?
He ended up being a podiatrist. In high school, his senior year in high school, he got caught skipping class. And they called him up in front of the assembly and said, tell us why you weren't in school yesterday. And he said, I was on my way back from a boat race, and I set a world record for speed. I don't know who the Higgins belongs to, but it's for a pretty boat. I remember this boat, but I can't tell you who owned it or anything more about it.
Okay.
So this here was the original house. We're standing right here now. But that's the original house before the addition was put on, before the outside deck was put on.
And then here's another shot.
Yep, that's before the building addition also.
Wow. So John, we're going to go over some heavy details of the yacht club, of the river, a lot of different things. Thank you for kind of going over some of the images in the room here. So taking it back, you were born in 52.
Correct.
On December 15th.
Yep.
52. And Lowell, and Virginia's your parents.
Correct.
And so what was your dad's industry?
He made mouthpieces before I did.
So
I bought the business
right,
from him.
Okay.
And prior to that, my grandfather made the mouthpieces.
And you'd mentioned that you think like over time there's over 50,000 mouthpieces
Probably
made.
over time, yeah.
And these are for clarinets.
Clarinets, B flat.
So how did your grandfather even stumble into that niche?
And I think he did stumble, to be honest with you. At 16, he went on the road with a traveling circus. Back then, they had orchestra pits because they didn't have PAs and didn't have bands, but they had orchestra pits, and he played a clarinet in the orchestra pit. Over the years, he became a very accomplished clarinet player, and he somehow obtained a glass mouthpiece. I have no idea where it was made or who made it, but he liked it. He liked it so well, he decided to make his own, which means he built his own glass tank, he built his own leer, which is the heat treat. He built his own molds, which is a big accomplishment within itself. It's probably a $40,000 thing now if I was to have a mold made. And he made probably over the years 10 of them. B-flat clarinet, alto sax, tenor sax, E-flat clarinet.
And what year was this when he started?
I don't know. I don't
What's
know
a
what year he
guess?
started. It would have to be probably in the 30s.
In the 30s?
Yeah. And right off the top of my head, without looking in my phone at his gravesite, I can't tell you when he was born.
Okay.
But yeah, he was a very accomplished musician. He was involved with a lot of people that nobody would know if I would say their name, but they could all be looked up. It's probably the easiest way to do it. I have a photograph of the world's first American Bandmaster Association, taken in Ohio, and it's got Willard Fillmore in it. It's got John Philip Sousa in the photograph. It's got probably 30 people, and it's all hand signed.
His name was Harry.
My grandfather's name was Harry.
Harry. So your dad, pretty much out the gate, he started working with him and like didn't really go into any other industry before he started helping?
Well, I was in the military for 6 years.
No, your dad.
My dad.
When he
he was in the
started.
Navy during
Okay.
World War II. When he got out of the Navy, he started working for my grandfather.
Got it. So it's pretty much immediate, essentially. So where did he serve when he was in the Navy?
I couldn't tell you. He was on the USS Uvalde, which is out of Texas,
Okay.
named for a city in Texas. But he was on that pretty much the whole time he was on the Navy.
And your path, you went to, where'd you go to high school?
I went to North Central.
You went to North Central.
I was in North Central, and they still had the draft and the lottery. And when they drew my number for the lottery, I was number 2. Only contest I've ever won, and I'm the prize. But I went into the service after doing a lot of research so I could do what I wanted to do in the service. I did not want to go to NOM, so I ended up working a deal with the military, which was not unusual. This is what they were doing at the time. Guarantee me my MOS, which was job, and guarantee me 3 years at the duty station if I could qualify for all the, So I became an MP. I spent 3 years in Hawaii.
Which island?
Oahu,
Okay.
Schofield Barracks. And I spent 18 months at Fort Harrison here in town. And I spent 18 months in Germany.
What was that like working in Germany?
Sucked.
Yeah.
I was not a road MP. I guarded nuclear missile site.
Holy cow.
We worked 24 hours on duty, 24 hours off duty. sitting in a tower 38 feet off the ground, watching the animals do things they shouldn't do, and that was about it. But I loved Germany in itself. The country was great. The beer was even better. But
Did you ever, and this is a little off topic, well, it's on topic, but did you ever hear of those sites being visited by people from above?
no,
Never did?
nah,
Okay.
nah.
It's a lot of that conspiracy that they're,
Yeah, they had probably 2, maybe 3 Nike Hercs that were missile tipped, lost my train of thought. They were nuclear. So they were real tight
Right.
on security and everything like that.
So in 85, you ended up taking over your dad's business.
Pretty much.
So what was kind of the trigger point that you were like, you know what, I'm just gonna do it?
Well, all through my whole life, I sat and I watched them make the mouthpieces,
Yep.
which is pressing them. I worked in the shop during high school for a job. And when I got out of the service, I had applied to be a police officer with the Veterans Administration here in town. And I got accepted. I went through all their psychological stuff and everything. And just before the training started, my dad fell while he was back where the glass tank was. He was checking something. He fell and broke his arm. He had orders that had to go out. And I was the only one who had worked enough in the shop that knew I could make these and get them out. And I just ended up staying with the mouthpieces for like 25 years.
As you said at one point that you were making like $2,000 a year.
We would mold 2,000 a year. We'd
Okay.
probably put 80% of that out the door. I would probably put, because I work by myself, nobody else. 27 hand operations after the product came out of the heat treat before it would go out the door. Shipped all over the world. Pete Fountain, I can name a lot of them, but nobody'd even know them anymore.
How'd you get the word out?
Didn't have to. Word of mouth. We did no advertising.
Well, you had to get it to some organizations, and then they happened to tell other
Whatever my
organizations,
grandfather did, I don't know. We sold to Selmers up north in Indiana. I sold to LeBlanc in Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Well, are these like instrument manufacturing companies?
They're wholesalers.
Okay.
They're wholesalers.
So you
Some of them have a lot of products with their name on them. At one time, we put Selmer's name on our mouthpieces when we sold to them. And there's still some around. They're on eBay. There's like 12 of them on there right now.
Okay. Excuse me. You got a little stuffed up nose today. So you used to come to the club when you were 11 years old?
11, 12 years old. As soon as I get away with coming
So
down here
you-
and not get in trouble.
You'd ride on a tractor down here?
I rode with one of the members who would drag the parking lot about every other weekend because it was gravel and just something to do on a weekend and whatever. I'd come down and ride on the tractor.
So it says you're putting the boats in the water. What was that?
When I was a couple years older, probably 12, maybe 13, I'd come down on my bicycle and I would help people put their boats in and out of the water. At that time, the yacht club would allow non-members to put their boats in and take them out. I think they charged like $1.25 to do it. But I would come down here and help them put the boats in the water, which meant usually riding on the trailer and pushing the boat off the trailer.
Right.
And I would tell them invariably, you're good anywhere around here, but don't go over here, which is it's a sandbar. It's still a sandbar. Invariably, they'd go upriver and come back down the river and smack right into it.
Flip out of the boat?
They didn't get flipped out of the boat, but they tore their boats up, tore their motors up.
Right.
Yeah.
So you joined in 79.
I joined the club, I got out of the service in August of 78, and I joined the club in early 79.
Who was your mentor? Who was your...
I don't even know who signed. My dad had been a member, so there were a lot of people who knew me, and I don't even remember who signed my application.
And you've had a lot of different positions.
I've had everything in the club except for recording secretary, and I also was the club manager for 3 years.
And were you Commodore?
a Commodore for 3 years too.
What years?
92, 3, and 4, I think it was.
So what had you been as a role before Commodore?
Well, I was on the board for like 3 or 4 years, and I kind of moved up the chain. I went to Rear Commodore for 2 years, and then I went to Vice Commodore for 2 years, and in my second year as Vice Commodore, the Commodore we had at the time, which was Russ Smith, he passed away. So I went from Vice Commodore immediately into Commodore. It wasn't an elected thing then, but I turned around and did it for 2 more years after that.
Okay. So you've got some notes here for some club stories. You've got Clifty Falls. And,
Okay, let me go with that one real quick.
Okay.
We had a club member who wanted to put his boat in and out of the water, and he didn't have a trailer hitch on his car. And his name was Cliff Bush. His wife is still a member here, and she owns, I'll think about it here in a second. But anyway, he borrowed a car from somebody, and it was a classic car, convertible. He brought it here, put the boat, backed the boat in the water, got out of the car, walked down to the boat. About the same time the car rolled into the river. And that was an all-day party.
Well, then what happened?
Well, the next day they ended up having to get a piece of equipment out here to get it out of the water because the backhoe they brought in to try to do it wouldn't do it.
That's great. So
yeah, his name was Cliff Bush, and his wife's name is Karen, and she owns Flag and Banner.
Oh yeah.
Here in town.
Yep.
Yep.
So next on the line here is River Patrol.
It was something that we did in my early years of being a member, which is in the early 80s and mid 80s. We would eventually end up everybody piling onto a pontoon boat, usually along with what we called a river punch, which was all the white liquors poured into a pot and 1 glass of river water. And that was river punch, and you had to drink it out of the container.
Oh my God.
It wasn't bad. I don't have anything.
It wasn't bad, huh?
No.
Okay.
No. Nobody died from it. A few hangovers.
It'll cut your teeth on it.
But we'd go out and we'd watch the sun go down, and we'd watch the sun come back up and not sleep in between. So we were out all night long on the river.
Well, let's talk about that. You know, everybody talks about daytime stuff, like what kind of things would come out at night, or what kind of things, what was different about the river, you know, ecologically, you know, from the day
I
to
just
the
carried
night?
over drinking from the evening before.
That's it.
It was basically just drinking.
What about the gators?
I don't have any.
There's no gators?
Nah.
I always heard rumors about the gators in the tubes down by Brawl Park.
Nah,
when I was a kid.
there's never been
Or
gators.
the lions in the back of the
The
park.
lions were there, but I don't know of the gators.
Right. All right, so the Landians, you know, has changed hands now multiple times, and that was kind of a fun party area. Was it Belly Beach?
Beer Belly Beach.
Beer
What
Belly
we
Beach.
called it. It was actually a sandy beach, and it was a great place. On the weekends, we'd just go up there, and everybody'd hang out. Somebody'd cook. We'd throw horseshoes. And we always left it cleaner than what it was when we found it. Because when we were going there, it was an apartment complex.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a really high-end apartment complex.
Right.
So there was a lot of times trash on the beach. And we'd always clean it up before we left.
Was there ever any fights between the apartment dwellers and the river dwellers?
Nah. There were, when Solana took it over,
Yeah.
before they put a bunch of riprap where the beach is, so we couldn't get up there. There was a lot of, well, you're on our property and yada, yada, yada. Okay, and we'd back off about 2 feet from the beach, floating, and they couldn't do anything about it. We'd drop an anchor and swim there.
So singing, caroling, what about that?
We'd do caroling on the river. One of our we'd carol on the river around Christmas time. One of our club members had a houseboat, a 43-foot houseboat, and we would all get on that houseboat, and we literally would go from one end of the river to the other, caroling and singing and drinking, of course. Always a good time.
Excuse me. Sorry about this, guys. What were some of the songs that, just like normal Christmas carols?
Just normal Christmas carols, yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Nothing. I was going to tell you about something else.
Well, boat parade.
3rd of July. almost every year.
How many boats?
It depended. When they finally ended up stopped doing it, you probably have 10. But back when I was a kid, there'd probably be 30, 35 boats, and it was the people who lived on the river, and they'd decorate their boats up, and they'd go all the way from Broad Ripple up to almost Keystone, and then they'd turn around and they'd all run back down fast. It was something to do on the 4th of July.
So was that leading up to the fireworks or during the fireworks?
No, fireworks
or?
have always been on the 3rd.
Got it.
Boat parade is on the 4th.
Right.
And we would usually have some kind of awards and judges here for the best.
Did you ever get involved in helping with the fireworks at all, or?
I worked, probably 3 or 4 years, I would help Meredith Smith, who was the one who put the fireworks on, him
Right.
and his family, and I would go there and help them then. But it got to the point where there were enough of the Smiths running around that they didn't need me. And
So explain helping. You're there with the wiring, with
no,
like,
I don't. There was no wiring back then. It was fuses and a fusee or a flare. But Meredith would yell, "Bring me a number 1, bring me a number 2." They were like 1 through 5, the shells, and whatever number he asked for, I'd drag it out. I'd pull it out from under the tarp because we worked under a tarp. Because if they went off short, we didn't want any of the sparks down on the
light
table.
Everything else, yeah.
Yeah, and then hand it to somebody, and they'd take it over and give it to Meredith. That was back in the day when it was somewhat dangerous.
Well, that's kind of a question. Do you ever remember anybody being hurt?
No.
No?
No, not doing that.
So when flooding happened, I'm sure you guys kind of adapted to the flooding and probably kept having a good time and partying. So what's kind of some of the situations when flooding would happen?
There were many times we would have what we would call a flood party. Nothing official, nothing. It was just, okay, we're going to the club. One time we had a brunch here, and the club was flooded, and we actually brought the people in, the members in, from about where the mailbox is, by John boat, and bring them up, let them get out, go up in the club, and we'd go back and get more. There's usually always somebody around here when it floods.
How deep have you seen it on the land? Like how, like coming up to your knee?
In 1991, it would have probably been up to here in the parking lot.
Up to your neck?
Pretty close, probably.
Really? So it's, I mean, bottom line is just rising and coming in. This was an island, so kind of where was the cut for the canal part? That would cut through?
The backside of the island was right about where our driveway is now, where you come into the club.
Okay.
And it was all the way down along that fence line. And it would come back into the club, and they ended up filling it in. At one time, the club had a bulldozer, and they'd use riprap and pretty much everything they could find to spare to fill it in before they put dirt on the top of it. So when I joined the club, they still had the bulldozer.
What projects did you help get implemented here at the club?
The outside river deck, the first one we built, I was in the middle of doing that one also. The statute of limitations has expired, I'm sure, but the telephone poles are out there were, let's just say they were appropriated. The first deck we built, the lumber was donated by a club member who worked for a logging company or a veneer company. And when we started driving nails in it, it had been a tree 2 days before we started driving nails in it, and it was rough sawn oak. It was not treated, so given the course of 10 or 15 years, it kind of got in disrepair.
Right.
And there was a hole in it, or a couple holes in it, and at one of the board meetings, I brought it up because I was on the board, and I said, we need to do something we need to redeck our deck out there. And at the time, it was Russ Smith, who was the one that died, and I took his place. He got kind of smart with me and said, if you think you can do something about it, do it. And when he came down the next day, all the decking was laying out here behind the building waiting for a dumpster. And with the club members, it took us 2 days from start to stop to see what you have out there right now. It's been redecked since then, but it was just done this last year. So it lasted 25, 30 years.
Okay.
When I first joined the club, one of our members, who was also a friend that I had known for years, John Bevins, he and I, by ourselves, with the club's permission, and they bought the material, we built a dock 110 feet long in like 8 sections, 16-foot sections. And he and I built those by ourselves and put them in. When I was Commodore, you've already talked to Kevin Williams. Him and another female who at the time was not a member but was the first mate, Kim Lamar at the time, but now she is, or Kim Brown, now she's Kim Lamar. We sat in here on a Sunday night drinking and drew up on a napkin what we thought would be a good addition for here. I was Commodore when this happened. And 3 or 4 days later, Kevin shows up with a set of prints. Now, they were not to scale. They were just kind of an artist's rendition of what it would look like if we would go with this particular plan. And we had what they call a corporate meeting, which actually was started by Brent Kauser and myself to give the board some kind of an idea of where everybody wanted to go. So we'd have all the corporate members come in. We still have those meetings. But I showed everybody at the corporate meeting, this is what we'd like to do and what we think it'd look like, and I want your blessings to be able to hire an architect to get started and give us an idea what it'll cost us. And from there, we have a building addition.
Wow.
Took about 2.5, 3 years to get it all done, but it's just one of them things. You sit around a while playing with a napkin at night when you're drinking.
All right, so take off your hat. Let me see this hat. We're going to do a little close-up on this. When was this hat made?
I have no idea.
What's a guess?
I bought it down at VA. I don't know who made it or.
You get it at the VA?
Yeah.
It says River Rats? I just thought ironically it would have been
You're okay
with
it. You're okay with that, but that's the reason I bought it, because it said River Rat. I've been a River Rat since I was born.
Right, yeah. We called them Ripple Rats when we grew up too, just everybody hanging out in Ripple as kids.
Yeah, 2 stories there, but the hat, I bought the hat. The River Rat actually was a unit that was stationed in Vietnam, and they patrolled the rivers.
Right, okay.
So that's how, but I thought,
that
how
makes
appropriate.
total sense, yeah. But I thought that looks old and custom that you had made here.
I'd like to take credit for it, but no, I didn't.
Okay.
When I was young and in school, in particular, junior high and high school, during the school, we'd always get ribbed, kind of like you did with the Ripple Rats,
Yep.
that they'd harass you and tease you and that kind of stuff. Okay, fine. Come summertime, all these people who wanted to call us river rats and harass us and that kind of stuff said, hey, can we come out and go swimming? No.
100%.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I grew up on Lake Maxenhaw, so we'd hang out in Broderpool, and then same thing, you want to go.
Yeah.
I mean, we come on the river multiple times, plenty of times, but that was a fun place to kind of get away that was still close. So, baby book, what's up with the...
that's my personal thing.
Okay.
My first word in my baby book was boat. My grandparents lived on the river. We lived across the river. So obviously spent a lot of time over on the water.
Sure.
But I've had, I've been on the water, I've been on the river all my life.
Have you been on it when it's in the wintertime?
Yeah.
So some ice skating. What's some wintertime stories?
We'd ice skate from where I lived, which is just down from the island, to Broad Ripple many times. Every year. Every year the river froze solid enough, which is, I'm talking 6 inches or more, to be on it pretty much all winter long. One of the years we had, it was an extremely cold fall. And by December 15th, which was my birthday, why I remember it, we were skating on the river by December. Well, that ice hung around all the way to end of March. We had 6 or 7 inches of snow on the ground. And it rained. It got warm and it rained. So all the water that was running into the river had no place to go.
Okay.
Because there was ice covered. So when the ice broke up, we had a log jam. We had an ice jam, which I had never seen before. This was in 63 or 4.
Was it piling up? Like
Oh,
what you would
it
think?
actually, I saw chunks of ice, I don't know, about as big as 2 of those tables that were 2 feet thick, shoot 25, 30 feet up in the air, come down and crash. That much force. The water was running fast and the river was breaking up. You had all this water coming downstream. The level was here on the river, but the river was up here when it was coming downstream, and it broke all the ice up and it jammed up on the Broad Ripple Dam and stopped the flow of water. Now the river's doing this, literally. And
then eventually just blows all the ice over the dam? Or?
no, it jammed up on the dam and it wouldn't let any ice go anywhere. So the ice was just basically backing up on the river. Somebody who lived close to Broad Ripple, and this is the story that I heard the sound, but it was a farmer. It was a farmer that lived close by, and he had some dynamite that he had been using to blow stumps out of his field. And he saw what was happening, and he was fast enough thinking. He went down and set dynamite in several different places and blew the ice up, and of course the river immediately went downriver. But the ice had jammed up all the way to Keystone Avenue.
What?
Yeah, it was, but I heard the dynamite, but the sound of this river breaking up and crashing and that kind of stuff, and the amount of power, the one thing about it is everything that was touching the water left. Now, nobody had docks in, nobody had boats in back then. We just didn't do it because we always had ice.
So the island, what was his situation with the island?
The island was man-made, and I cannot tell you what year it was. I believe it was before the Broad Ripple Dam. And the reason the island was made, or the guy who made the island also did an interwoven log dam across the river to force water back behind the island, because he had a grist mill back there, and he would grind grain from barges that came upriver. Now, it very possibly could have been from the Broad Ripple Canal at the time. They went up to the river and then went upstream and did that and came down from downstream. But that dam has all kinds of steel and cables in it, according to my father. And it's never been moved, and it won't go anywhere.
So where is it positioned?
It's just below the Keystone Bridge.
Just south of the Keystone Bridge.
South of the Keystone Bridge.
Okay. And then you've got a little bit of talk about the gravel pits.
The landing, the first gravel pit was Sycamore Springs. Is that it? It's right off Keystone, west of Keystone, north of the river. It's not Sycamore Springs. But anyway, that's where they dug the first, the gravel company brought a dredge in, or built a dredge there. Mystic Bay is the name of it. And that's where they dug all of that out. Then they came out of there and they went upriver behind the island to the landings, and they went in there and they dug it all out. And when they were done digging in there, they turned around and went back into the river and went all the way up to Sandy Point, which is condominiums now. And they actually left the hull of the dredge up on the north end, or the upper stream side of Sandy Point, and just filled it full of sand and dirt over it, and it's still there.
Wow. So the Keystone Bridge itself, what's some of the lore
63, 64. It was right after my parents moved from the house that I was born to across the street to my grandparents' house. And on Saturday mornings at 6 o'clock in the morning, they started driving pilings. And it just, I usually was so angry with it that here, waking me up on a weekend
So this is the one that's basically right in front of the mall. That's the green iron
No,
bridge.
that's the old iron bridge. That at one time was the only way across the river. Before Keystone was built, you would come up Keystone, you would have to turn right. You would take River Road all the way down, and it wound around, and it would come back out on 86th Street.
Okay.
The road's not there anymore because they built the condos.
Right.
But the road would go down and make a sharp left, it'd go all the way to the river and make a sharp right, and then come out at 86th Street.
So I know you said there weren't any gators, but what were some of the fishing situations or wild animal situations back in the day?
Neil, when I was growing up, the only animals that you would see on the river on the wild side were muskrats.
Okay.
And you would occasionally see white ducks. The reason for the white ducks would be because Mommy and Daddy would buy the kids ducks for Easter. And as soon as they realized that the ducks going to tear up their yard where they're fenced in at, they thought, we're going to turn them loose on the river and let them live free. Well, they couldn't fly, so they didn't last
Isn't that
very
ironic?
long.
They couldn't fly.
But the parents got them out of their yards.
That's hilarious.
Now we've got everything here: muskrats, beavers,
There's bald
geese,
eagles.
ducks. Huh?
The bald eagle nests.
Yep, we got that. We've got
Do you kind of remember when they started showing up? Because that's
the bald eagles.
Yeah.
No, I can't tell you when they started showing up around here.
Because there's a huge nest that's
Yeah, it is.
kind of by Keystone a little bit, or
No,
by
it's
the strip mall that's on the south side of 86th Street or 82nd Street.
no. The eagle's nest is upriver to what almost we call a third pit, which would be behind Keystone at the crossings.
Right.
The river right
Yeah.
there. That's where the eagle's nest is. And
Right.
it's not the original one. The original one, the tree fell, and they built another one across the river. But you got to figure eagles' nests are almost 8 feet around.
Yeah, they're huge.
Unbelievably huge. Yeah. Fun to watch. Fun to watch fish.
Right. Did you fish a lot?
When we were kids, we would sit on the seawall, Mom, Dad, me, my brothers, and we would fish for carp. Not because we wanted to eat them, but if you hook into a nice carp, you got a fun fight. And that's what we fished for. And I got older, I started fishing for bass, and I still fish for bass and crappie and that kind of stuff.
I took a couple of shish kebabs and cut off the end of the broom itself on the stick, and drilled holes through the stick and put them on the end of it, and got my mask fins and snorkel, and I'd swim up to carp face to face.
Yep.
And stab him like I was some survivor of some other land or whatever. And then I'd give them to fishermen. I'd pop up out of the water next to their fishing boat.
Well, my dad used to trap here. He trapped muskrats when he was younger. And every once in a while, he would get a mink. And we still have mink around here. You'll see them every once in a while. They're actually pretty destructive, like the muskrats are, but...
Never saw any beaver?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, would you like? They're the biggest nuisance going. You look at our trees along our riverbank, you'll find out chicken wire, because they'll literally come in and take a tree down in the night.
In the night?
Yeah. And
Jeez.
when I was growing up, kind of a funny story, when I was growing up, I had been in the library, for lack of better terms, and I'd been reading a Reader's Digest. And it was talking about Indiana. There are no beavers in Indiana. I thought, oh, okay. I can't say at the time I'd seen any, but when I walked through the house, I looked out the dining room window and I watched a tree branch swim upstream. So that pretty much let me know that there were beavers, and there was a beaver hut right across the river from us. So we watched them when they built Sandy Point. We'd go up there, turn the motor off at night or in the evenings before dark, and we'd watch them. And sooner or later, one of them would see us, and they'd slap their tail, and they'd all be gone. But they're cool, but man, they are destructive.
Yeah.
They are destructive, and they're big. 60, 70-pound beavers are not unusual.
Right. All right. So, how about the boat races?
I never saw any of them. I heard a lot about them. My cousin used to race boats, and he would come down here in the springtime before the races started.
Yeah.
And you got to figure he's got what they call stacks on him, which is a very loud megaphone exhaust. And we'd throw his boat in the water. He'd run down the river. You'd hear him get off the throttle, turn the thing around, and come back up river, running about 80, 85. And usually before he got to Broderpool and back, there was a sheriff sitting here going, "Okay, boys, put it away. Somebody called."
Did the law enforcement have boats?
DNR, yeah. We had a DNR officer out here when I was growing up, or when I was in my teens. His name was Boots. Nobody liked him because, well, he was a cop and he'd get you for everything you didn't, you would be doing. And he tied his boat up here to the yacht club, and every time we'd ski by it, we'd spray it. And he'd wonder why the boat was half sunk when he'd come out here to patrol the river when there hadn't been any rain.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, raft race. I've got memories myself, but what's some of your memories of the raft race?
Greatest party ever on the river. One year I remember the rafts were lined up on Keystone Avenue down to 65th Street to get into the landings. About 3/4 of the people who were in this raft race had absolutely no idea what they were doing. If the river was like it is now, low, it was an all-day adventure, or they had to paddle.
Right.
There's no current. But you name it, you could see it out here. Some good, some bad. The only thing I didn't like about it is when they'd put their rafts in the water, they'd have 5 cases of beer with them, and they'd get on the water. By the time they took it out of Broderpool, there wouldn't be a bottle or a case around. So they all ended up getting thrown in the river. Trash was terrible.
Yeah, so how did that cleanup really happen? It had to have happened. You just can't leave all the stuff.
Club members, people who lived along the river would clean up their banks in front of their place.
Right.
The yacht club right now, and that was long before the yacht club was doing this, every year we do a river cleanup, which one weekend in April, which is like the second or third weekend in April, we get a dumpster down here provided by the city, and we're going to take the boats out, and we go along and pick up all the trash along the river. The first year we did it, it took like 3 or 4 dumpsters.
Wow.
There was that much stuff we got. But as the years have gone on, like right now, it's usually not really bad. But it's not, I don't know. I think people are a lot more conscious about what they do.
Yeah.
I was like every other kid when I was younger. We'd sink beer cans and keep on trucking.
Right.
But now it's a whole different ballgame.
Sure. So there's a note here of cars in the river. How many cars and locations are we talking about?
Yeah, several. One year, the river was up, and I looked out my dining room window, and there was this little tiny patch of blue in the river about 25 feet off the shore. So I just kind of kept an eye on it, and as the river went down, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And the next thing I know, there's a police car across the river. The guy who lived there was a police officer, but they had called a wrecker in, and they towed her car out of the river there. There's so many stories about cars in the river, it's not even funny.
Well, like what about if any of people in the car still when it went into the river?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Nothing over a bridge that dropped?
No.
Huh. So was there kind of a dump area where people would bring their car?
Up in Sandy Point, before they built the condos, when it had been a gravel pit and they stopped working it, everybody went 4-wheeling up through there. I did too. And I was on Union Chapel Road one day, and I looked over into the gravel pit, and I saw a tailgate sticking up out of the water. So I called the sheriff. I met with a gal sheriff officer on River Road. And I told her when I met her, I said, you can't get in there with your car. I said, if you want to, you can get in my Jeep or Scout, and I'll drive you back there, and you can take a look at it, and you can run the plate. I had already been a cop, so I knew how all this worked. And I took her, and she called, they brought a wrecker in, and they pulled out like 2 or 3 cars and several motorcycles, and the cop finally says, I'm done. I said, there's too many of them down here to pull them all
Jesus.
out. Yeah.
Wow. All right, so you've got another little note here of waving on the river.
We had a place on Tippecanoe at one time, and it was nothing like this body of water. You would wave occasionally if you knew somebody. On the river, you need one of them things on a spring that does this, because you wave to everybody on the river. You know everybody. When I was in my drinking days, I always said I could start out on Sunday, which there wasn't any liquor stores open then, and the club wasn't even open, and I could be drunk long before I got to Broad Ripple and never buy a drink, because I know everybody that lives on the river. It was, yeah.
So what are the boats that you had over time?
I started out with a rowboat with a 5-horse Mercury on it, and I ended up with a 13-foot Aristocrat with a 30-horse Mercury, and then my dad had a Yellow Jacket with a 60-horse 6-cylinder Mercury. I had too many boats to even, Boston Whaler. Now I got a bass boat, a pontoon boat, and a jet ski.
Okay. So,
and a little jet boat.
So who are some of the crazier boats you remember on the river?
Crazy or operators?
Or whatever, the ones that really stood out.
There was one that was put in the water here, and they docked it upstream here, and it was called the Box. And I had never heard of this before. I only saw it run once. It had a 4-speed transmission in it, which is unheard of in boats. And it also had trim tabs set up through the steering wheel that if you wanted to turn left, this one would drop down, and it would help hook the boat around.
Okay.
Never saw it run. I saw it run once, but it was not anything crazy.
Right.
I did go for a ride on a boat that was a friend of my dad's, and he was a club member, and he and I used to go to boat races together, but before that, he had a friend that had a drag boat, or a V-drive, and he brought it out here, and of course, when I heard it, it was, can I go? I'm 10 or 11 years old. Sure. And that's the only time I've ever hit 100-mile-an-hour on White River.
That's scary.
Yeah, not bad if you're going down south and the road, it's straight, nothing floating, nobody on the water.
Right.
When I was young, my dad would not pull me water skiing on weekends because there's too much traffic.
Just action, yeah.
And now, every day out here is the same amount of traffic as it was back when I was a kid.
That
there's
busy.
always somebody, there's always somebody on the river. If you break down, there's somebody there that's going to help you.
Well, that's kind of your next point,
Yeah.
is you can always find help. So is that basically what you're referencing? That
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I'm the same way. If I had $1 for every boat I towed in the river, from my first boat to now, I could probably retire.
So who was one of the people that really helped you out, and how screwed were you in the situation that you needed help? And what was the situation?
I had oars. My motor quit because I was running during the week and there wasn't anybody out.
Okay. But that's the worst scenario? Like, there's got to be a couple situations you were like...
Nothing really crazy. I had a 5-horse Mercury, and I'd go from sun up to sundown, wide open all day long, up and down the river. I knew the river well.
What about the helicopter and the bridge?
Winston Canals, and this was right after I got out of the service. The first house there at Keystone and River Road, it's a log cabin. He and his wife and kids lived there. And he had a helicopter. Now, there's a lot of people that know Winston Canals. He owned AAA Wrecking. His company was the one that dynamited and imploded the Claypool Hotel. But my mom used to take care of his books back when he was a small demolition contractor.
Okay.
And I asked him, I said, can I go for a ride? And he goes, sure. So I turn around and I go over there, and he goes, hey, he says, go up there and grab that gas nozzle and put it in that gas tank and turn that crank. And I turned it for a while, and he goes, that ought to be good enough. And I put it away, and I got in the helicopter, and he powered it up, and I looked about 1/8 of a gas tank, about 1/8 of a tank of fuel. But he picked up, he started it, we left the ground, and he backed out over the river, turned to the right, dropped down a little bit, and flew under the Keystone Bridge.
Holy shit.
I flew under that bridge three times with him.
Are you kidding me?
No, not at all.
Was that a little nerve-wracking?
You know, yes and no. First of all, the helicopter had flotation pods on it. It didn't have just skids. The other thing is I've just gotten out of the service, so I spent a lot of time when I was stationed in Hawaii flying with a gentleman I met over there who was a helicopter pilot. He didn't do it for trade. He did it just to keep himself current. In the evenings, he'd go get a helicopter and we'd go fly. It wasn't like a training exercise or anything like that. We'd just go fly. So I was pretty familiar with helicopters. But yeah, one time we flew out, went under the Keystone Bridge, gained some altitude, flew down the river, got down to Broad Ripple, dropped down behind the island, turned around and looked back, and we were level with the water coming at us from there. Turned around and flew back up into the landings, and we landed there just kind of playing. And then we hit a couple places in, oh man, I can't think of anything today. A couple of high-dollar neighborhoods that he would fly over, and always looking to see who was sunbathing, because he knew there were three of them that were pretty much always natural.
That's funny.
And we turned around and flew up to where Friday's was at Keystone at the crossings, and it was just opened. And he flew down, he got real low and was still looking in the windows pretty much. And all of a sudden we picked up a vibration. And man, he put it on the ground real quick and shut it off. And I got out and walked around, and there was 3 or 4 pieces of grass, blades of grass on the rotor. And that's all it took to give it a bad vibration. Pulled them off and got back up and flew home.
So who are some of the people that you want to kind of honor? They're alive and they're passed, either way.
Man, there's so many of them and nobody here would know 90% of them. Yeah, I wouldn't know how to even go about trying to do that.
What were some of the best guys you remember hanging out with?
Well, John Bevins, he and I built the club dock. He was about 320 pounds, and they had an amputation below the knee. He also grew up on the river, and when he was older than me. And when he was a kid, he accidentally shot himself in the knee with a .22. And the only thing he ever asked the doctor while the doctor was working on him, since he had to have his leg removed, can I still go swimming? There's so many club members here that I could name off that nobody knows them. Nobody would know them.
What would be some other people that are still alive that you think should save some stories?
It's hard to say. Are you going to talk to Les Sebring?
He's actually been sponsored.
Yeah, Les is a good guy. Kind of an ego, but he has been involved with the club an awful lot. I know you've talked to Rex and Donna.
Rex yesterday, yeah.
Very much involved with the club when they were younger, as we all were. When I joined the club, it was Rex, Donna, Don Conyer, his wife Trish, Ralph Canal Sr., Les Sebring, Gary Gasper, and those were the River Patrol people. But the club closed at 11 o'clock at night, and it's not like it is today. Well, there's a few people drinking, we'll stay open a little later. It was 11 o'clock, you're out of here. I'd wake up every morning, and my stomach would hurt because I had laughed so hard the night before. It was that much fun. And it's still kind of that way here. Mm-hmm. I'm not in the cliques that like I was back then. And I don't drink anymore, so a lot of times when I'm in here and everybody's having a good time and rolling on the floor laughing, and I'm looking around going, wonder what's on Netflix. Because I'm not on the same plateau they are. But yeah, it's a great club to be a member of. There's a lot of people here I don't know anymore.
So how many total years have you been a member now?
I joined in 78,
So
fall of 78, well,
cool.
79, let's say, and then I became a corporate in 80. So I've been a corporate member for 45 years.
Yeah.
I've held every office in the club except recording secretary, multiple years. And I still do what I can do down here. I'll do a lot of work with the tractor and that kind of stuff. Come dock day, I usually jump on the tractor so I can put docks in and out. There's a boat on the river right now, Jeff Harden. Yeah, and they boat out here year round now. That was unheard of.
Well, it's not as freezing as it was back in the day,
Well,
so they
even
can kind
when
of
it
get away
is
with it.
freezing, these guys have got enclosures on their pontoon boat
Sure.
and heat.
Right.
So, but that was unheard of back when I was a kid, because invariably there would be enough ice going down the river that it would take anything that's laying loose.
All right, so here's the final thing before we close out. So you brought this as well, so why don't we see this and give the little backstory of this object here.
My father made those in 1976 for the bicentennial for the American Legion. The original toothpick holders that he made had an imprint of a silver dollar in it. And at one time, somebody from the government came out and made him destroy the mold. And long story short, he found some that were being sold later on, and he called the government, and they go, "Oh, that guy was a flake. He only was with us for about a year, and you didn't have to do that." So $30,000 later, he could have rebuilt the mold, but that didn't happen.
Right.
So, you know.
That's a pretty neat piece, celebrating 200 years of the country.
Yeah. I've still got several of them, but I've given a lot of them away. We designed, my dad designed those and had the insert made for the American Legion. George Cornelius, who was a very good friend of my dad's that he grew up with on the river, he was the one driving behind the actual pieces. He did all the printing on the boxes because he owned Cornelius Printing Company here in Indianapolis, which is the company that was doing the tickets for the 500-mile race. So needless to say, my mom, if she wanted to go to the race, he'd just say, "Where do you want to sit?" and he'd bring her tickets. But my dad grew up with George Cornelius and Joe Yount, and several of other people that were out here. And actually, George and his wife introduced my parents on a blind date.
Wow.
Yep.
That's great. Melissa, I really appreciate you sharing. Is there anything else you want to add before we close out?
Nah, I'll think of stuff as we get older.
You got an hour of some great history. It's pretty impressive. I'm glad we got to do the pictures on the wall stuff first.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Mr. Obrien, we're going to close this out, and this is now part of the legacy.